Hello and welcome to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, is our most ambitious project yet. Our plan is to look at the state of the comic book industry during a particular year, and then to examine in detail the major ways that Marvel Comics in particular evolved during that year. We'll look at who was creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics either debuted or ended. After that, we'll get down to business, take out our stack of Daredevil comics, and look at what our old friend, the Man Without Fear, was up to during that same time. We're glad you've joined us. We are back with the second half of 2002, the Eisner Award-winning Daredevil. And we're going to talk about it this week. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, are you excited?
Oh, yeah. These are fun stories. These are great stories. And I'm excited that you had such a good time with them. So I'm interested to hear kind of what you thought reading through them for the first time.
These were page turners. These I went through them. I motored through them rather quickly. It was really, really exciting just from the jump of the books that we're going to talk about this week. I think it was a really interesting year. And the first thing that I would say, just if we're going to talk about big picture here, it was interesting because it all felt like one big story. Even though that there were some carved out, story arcs, and they had story names of them and that sort of thing. This felt like one continuous story all through the year.
Absolutely. No question about it. One very convoluted story throughout the entire year.
Do you think it was convoluted?
Oh, yeah. There was like 1,000 characters in this thing.
Yes, there was a lot of characters in here. There was a lot that happens this year. But I thought, in thinking about just comics as a whole, I would say that it didn't feel like there was too much going on. I never felt like I never felt confused by what was going on, and I never felt like there was a bunch of extraneous stuff being told to me that didn't necessarily have anything to do with what was going on. Right? There was no.
I would agree with that.
The story was tight, but there was a lot to it.
No, I would absolutely agree. I mean, it's well plotted and well thought out. It's like, the Maltese Falcon or something, where it's incredibly complex, but it all makes sense, and there's a reason why everything's there. It just sometimes takes you 2 or 3 viewings to actually understand what was going on,
Yeah, I wouldn't say that you need that many readings of these books in order to really get what's going on. I think if you dive in right where we're going to start talking today, you can get through it quickly, and if you have any sort of understanding of what was going on before now, you just go right through these.
There you go.
These really are some of my favorite comics. They're again not quite to the Frank Miller level, but these are going to be books I'm going to remember for a while, and I totally understand why they got the Eisner Award this year.
Yep, absolutely agree.
All right, so without much further ado, should we jump in and let's talk about the year for Daredevil?
I would like that. I would like that very much.
The year in Daredevil.
All right, Dwayne. Before we get going, it looks like you've got a pile of guest appearances and the like that you want to mention, many of which, by the way, I think are trade paperbacks and reprints and masterworks and stuff like that.
A lot of these are not number. Yeah, there's a
lot of these are not him doing new things. It's just sort of appearances in reprints and greatest hits type of things.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what stuff is new versus what stuff is reprints. So I'm just going to give you a list of some of the appearances that he had this year. before we move on and talk specifically about the main Daredevil run from this year. So the main Daredevil run books that we're going to look at that came out for 2002 are issues 27 through 38. We're actually going to be talking about issues 26 through 37 because the way the kind of the story narrative goes, 37 is a really nice stopping point because issue 38 starts another story. We have Daredevil, the end of the Daredevil Yellow run with issue number 6. We have Paradise X, The Heralds, issues 1 and 2. Elektra, number 6, giant-sized mini Marvels starring Spidey, number 1. Marvel Knights, Millennial Visions, number 1. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, number 39 and 41. Essential Marvel Team-Up, number 1. Paradise X, issues 0 through 5. Marvel Knights 2 through 6, Marvel Knights Double Shot number 1 and number 4, Amazing Spider-Man number 2, Ultimate Spider-Man Special number 1, something called Order issues 5 and 6, Spider-Man and Daredevil number 1, something called Merville number 2, and then we have the Marvel Masterworks The Submariner volume 1. We have a Daredevil Yellow, Fantastic Four, Life and Death of Captain Marvel graphic novels. So there was a ton of appearances. Gone are the days of that year or two where he had just a very limited number of appearances. Matt Murdock or his alter ego Daredevil appeared in a bunch of places this year.
Yep.
If we're looking at the main Daredevil run, Brian Michael Bendis, the writer, all year, issues 27 to 38. Alex Maleev does all but one book this year as both the pencil and inks, 27 to 37. And then Manuel Gutierrez picked up with issue 38. But as I said, issue 38 starts a new storyline, so we're not going to be focusing on that this year. And instead, we're going to talk about that more when we get to 2003. So, the year for Matt Murdock and Daredevil begins with a 6-part story called Underboss that began in December 2001. And in that story, we see a bombing attempt on Matt Murdock's life just outside the courthouse. And we see a guy by the name of Sammy Silk and several of the Kingpin's other underbosses repeatedly stab the Kingpin and leave him to die on the floor. That's all in the very first book.
Yes.
It is just crazy. This story just hits the ground running. And it looks, by the way, absolutely fabulous in sort of a gritty, grisly Netflix series version of a comic book. This to me felt like the look of the Netflix series. Would you say that is at all correct, Dan?
Well, and not only that, but it's literally more like the look of a Martin Scorsese movie or something like this. I mean, it's absolutely got a not comic book feel to it. This feels like a gangster movie, and it's more like if you cross some sort of Wagner opera with a gangster movie. You know, it feels like this is almost operatic. Like you've got this betrayal at this massive level and everything else, and it just feels larger than life. So I love the beginning to it, and then the fact also that everything is out of order chronologically. So things happen and then they go back. So it's not like we're not going to be told why exactly this is happening. We're going to find out a bunch of stuff. But he just drops us in at this exciting point at the beginning, and then he's like, "Don't worry, we'll fill it in, and you'll understand why this happened eventually." You know?
Yes. I mean, we've seen this in TV shows. We've seen this in movies where they basically start you off 3/4 of the way through the story at one of the most climactic, action-packed points in the story, and then you just sort of are holding your breath and then you suddenly find yourself back days, weeks, months, and then you start to see how we got to that point. And
You know,
and that's exactly what happens here.
but
So
keep in mind also, this isn't like a fight scene. This is, you know, essentially at this point, the Kingpin has been blinded, and a bunch of guys just surround him and start stabbing the heck out of him until he's dead.
just
Right? It's not.
shivving him and just leaving
It's
him a bloody
you
mess
know.
on the floor. And this is after, like, we see Matt Murdock in a courtroom. He's doing his lawyer thing. He goes out on the steps. He starts walking towards a car, and the car just blows up right as he's almost about to get into it. And so it's like there's just all this action, and you're just like, what the heck is going on? What did I miss? What is going on here?
No.
So, who put the hit out on Matt Murdock? And who is this Sammy Silk who just rallied the Kingpin's underlings against him? Well, we start to get the answers to this over the next 5 books through a series of flashbacks while the story, from the point that we came in on, continues forward. Silk is the son of a crime boss in Chicago who needed to get out of town. He came to New York, and he went to work for the Kingpin. And when the Kingpin wouldn't let him take a hit out on Matt Murdock, he caught wind of Murdock's seemingly open secret within the Kingpin network, and then set in motion a plan to take out Murdock and the Kingpin with the help of the Kingpin's son, Richard.
Yeah.
This is the first we're hearing of Richard. Am I wrong on this?
Mostly yes. He'd been kind of. I think we knew he had a son before, but we'd never really seen him, as far as I know. This may have been his actual first appearance, is sitting there in that bar.
Yeah. So, and so it's interesting. So, yeah, everybody, like, within the Kingpin's regime seems to know that Matt Murdock and Daredevil are one and the same, and everybody's sort of is like not talking about it, but this Sammy Silk is getting all high and mighty, and then finds out about this, and because he's like, why won't the Kingpin let me put this hit out on this random lawyer who my family wants to get rid of, and it really takes a really interesting turn, because I was like, I didn't expect Richard to just come out and tell him this, and it's like, okay, this sort of, then I totally get how we ended up where we went in that very first issue, and it happens really kind of quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean that really what's happening is that the Kingpin specifically does, as what you said, that the Kingpin specifically refuses a request from the other guy's dad, like one of these mob family sort of, I'm asking you to do a favor on the day of my daughter's wedding or something like this. And he's just like, no, not going to do it. And he doesn't explain it. He's just like, get out of here, little boy. I don't want to talk to you.
He is adamant that this is not a thing that's going to happen at all. And we're not going to discuss it. I said no. You need to move on.
But without explaining it is the thing. And so the guy's just sort of like, whatever. Then he finds out. And I mean, it is interesting because his reaction makes sense. He's like, literally, he knows who this guy who's messing with all of his business is. The guy's walking around as a blind man in the middle of the city every day. We could just shoot him, but nobody touches him. And this actually explains a major plot hole of the last 5 years of Daredevil. Right?
Yes, it is.
That essentially why nobody in the New York underworld has just been told by Kingpin to go and shoot Matt Murdock in the head while he's walking to the courthouse. And it's because he's got this thing where he wants to do it all himself or whatever, or Murdock's essentially under his protection. So it's fascinating. And I think it adds a layer onto the Kingpin Murdock sort of relationship, if you want to call it that, this demented connection these two people now have of ruining each other's lives constantly. you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's so yeah, he sets out the plan. We obviously know he's the one that planted the bomb that almost took out Matt Murdock. We also see why he now feels like he basically thinks he can take over as the kingpin. If he could take out Matt Murdock, then obviously Daredevil won't be a problem. And then like he can do what he wants, and obviously because Kingpin doesn't want him to do this, he's going to have to do something about the Kingpin because the Kingpin's going to do something to him as a result of him disobeying the order, that sort of thing. So he
Yep.
rallies the troops with the help of Richard, uh, Wilson Fisk's son, and they do this. He gets the other underbosses in line with them, gets them all, set up for this meeting, and then that's what we end up seeing at the beginning of the story of Wilson Fisk getting, shivved a bunch of times.
A bunch of times. Yes.
Yes. But we've seen Wilson Fisk get a bunch of things happen to him before, and he's managed to survive. And it turns out this would be the case yet again. Vanessa Fisk finds out that her husband's been stabbed and is in critical condition. She's out of the country. He's in critical condition, not killed, as some of the initial reports are claiming. So the initial reports in the newspapers and stuff are that Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, is dead. She ends up going to New York, and despite objections from his doctor, wants the Kingpin taken to the airport and flown out of the country. She also orders those that betrayed the Kingpin to be killed, including her son Richard, whom she visits and kills herself. Talk about cold. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think the interesting thing really as I'm reading through these is more and more they seem like, operatic but Shakespearean. Like the
Yes.
characters and the settings, like this is Macbeth or something. She is Lady Macbeth. They are sort of classic larger than life knaves on this stage type of thing. And it's interesting the way it's all played. I also find it intriguing. You talk about how it starts with all this action and the like. There is not, to my mind, any action in any of these books. It is at least not superhero action.
After that first issue, no. There's
You have
all
like
character and story and development.
And almost all of it is people sitting around talking. Or if there is anything that is sort of like a fight, it feels more like a fight that would just be something again in a gangster movie. Is this something that could be almost everything in this either could happen in the Godfather movies or in like an episode of Law and Order, right?
Yeah.
And the only real exception to that, I think you'll get to it in a little while, is when somebody's, throwing a truck at Murdock's brownstone. But that is literally the only superhero action, I think, in like 10 books of comics.
Right. Yeah.
So,
that's probably right. Yeah. And yet it's incredible. I was hooked, like just hooked, and just page turn after page turn, book after book. I just wanted to see where this story was going to go.
There you go. All right. So I'll let you continue with that. Let's tell the folks where the story's going to go.
So Underboss, that story arc ends with Silk fearing for his life because all his kind of cohorts in taking down the Kingpin are now dead. Turns himself into the FBI and asks for protection. When the FBI refuses, he tells them Murdock's secret identity. Oh my goodness. And from there, things start to go really crazy for Matt Murdock. An FBI agent needing some cash sells Murdock's story to the Daily Globe, which is the Bugle's rival paper, and it's ran as a front page story, and a media circus descends on Murdock's brownstone.
Yep.
Ben Urich and Peter Parker tell J. Jonah Jameson that the Daredevil secret identity story is a hoax, but both refuse to tell him who the real Daredevil actually is. Foggy tries to get Matt to give up his life as Daredevil. And then, to your point, seeing this story in the newspaper, Mr. Hyde shows up at his house and starts destroying Murdock's house with like a truck before Daredevil and Spider-Man can intervene and put a stop to things. It is absolute just overnight just chaos for Matt Murdock. And chaos in just an absolutely should have happened any one of a number of times over the last 40 years, but now it is actually finally happening, and it is just a spectacle to look at.
And it's interesting the different people in his life and how they react to this. Where
Yes.
you have, Foggy's telling him, look, you have been in courtrooms defending people who you'd hauled in as Daredevil. You have been in courtrooms prosecuting people you'd hauled in as Daredevil. You've been in courtrooms when Daredevil's on trial as a lawyer.
Yes.
You are losing your law license and going to jail if this comes out, because lots of things you've done are not legal. And then Black Widow is basically like, let's go swing around the city and beat some people up down at the waterfront, because you got to get out on, get back to doing what you do. And this is spoken, of course, like someone who doesn't have a secret identity, right? She's been sort of out as who she is for a long time. You have Peter Parker and Ben Urich who are out there trying to defend him and deflect. And Urich, putting his career on the line, almost trying to deflect some of this stuff. So I like how you see all of the different characters in his orbit and how they're trying to find a way to come to terms with this, especially when we get to the next couple of issues and see how Matt eventually finally resolves and decides on things. So
after some time, Murdock actually holds a press conference and denies that he's Daredevil. So we're going to jump into that in more detail during this week's Spotlight, because this, I think, was one of the key moments of this year. Was that issue and that press conference. Afterwards, after a rooftop chat with Elektra at the urging of Black Widow, it looks like things will be settled with the Daily Globe after Daredevil visits the FBI agent who gave up his secret. But then the Globe's owner, a guy by the name of Rosenthal, nixes the deal because Murdock was being too smug about their agreed upon agreement for resolving the case. It was so Matt Murdock, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. It was they're in a conference room, they're talking to the owner, and he's just like, you've got nothing. And this is after, he's gone and threatened a witness, which, as Matt Murdock, you'd think he'd know he's maybe not allowed to do that, but hey, you do what you got to do, I guess. And he's just like, man, I don't think you've got the case. So you're going to give me this money. We're going to give it to charity, all this sort of thing. And he's just sort of like whistling Dixie as he's getting ready to walk out of there. And Rosenthal's like, all right, no, I am not doing this. Screw you. We're gonna press on. I don't care what my actual case is. This is coming out because you're being a jerk about this.
Yep. It is classic Murdock. There's no question about it. I mean, he is so often the architect of his own problems. But in this case, I mean, it really is a matter of sort of like the end of Iron Man. If Tony Stark just stands up in front of the entire assembled crowd and tells them, I am not Iron Man, right?
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing where he has that choice of Do I come clean or do I dig myself in and say, this is my story forever? And he's just, this is my story forever. And now the problem is everybody he knows who cares about him ends up having to be party to and essentially an accomplice in this lie, which drags
Yes.
all sorts of other good people into bad situations.
Yes. Either overtly and we see it, or things going on off panel, as it were, to kind of deal with this. So that's basically it. The year actually ends with part one of the next named storyline called The Trial of the Century, which we're going to talk about next year. And that's a little bit misleading because it isn't the trial that you think it actually is.
No, although it kind of is,
It
because
it is it is, but it isn't. Yes.
it's just, yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I love the way that Bendis handles that too. And I look forward to talking about that in a couple of weeks as well. But
But this is the year for Daredevil. That is everything that happened, and rather succinctly, but it was told so very well.
so, got a couple of things that I just wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
Did you notice anything weird about one of the issues in comparison to all the other issues? In terms of the words in it.
No, not exactly. Nothing that really stands out to me now, though it's been probably a week or two since I've finished reading these.
One of them had no words.
Oh yes, yes. That's right. There was an entire issue that went completely wordless, and in fact, we actually, as part of that, we got kind of the Bendis narrative of the issue,
Nope, the actual script at
the
the end.
actual script that they then made the book out of. That's right.
I think that's cool. And it was interesting because obviously that's a big stress on the artist. But I think that one of the things they tried to note and show with the script is how much work it is for the writer to actually write a story or tell a story when they can't use their
It's
words,
words, yeah.
right? Um, See, now you know how hard it was for Stan Lee all those years, having
Yes.
having to do all those
I
stories
I
without actually
I
writing any stories.
Yeah,
So,
I now understand why every issue felt like a small novel.
so, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they did that, which was, a formal digression, and then on the other stuff, I think it's amazing, and part of this is the art is just fantastic. Alex Maleev has the perfect style for this because everything he does feels kind of gritty, and it feels like 1970s New York, dirty and dark and the like, and moody. But so much of this, like when she puts out the hit on all of the other guys, it feels like when Mo Rocca and everybody else are killed in the Godfather movies. When in many ways, Vanessa is sort of the Al Pacino character of these stories. She's
Sure.
the person who was out of the business, and she was off lounging in the sun someplace in Europe, and then suddenly somebody messes with her husband, and even though they're strange, she comes back and just messes everybody.
Yeah.
She's like, you do not want to make me angry, evidently, right? And and then she sort of just leaves. But I think there is a lot of this where it has sort of the structure of The Godfather, and then it has very much that sort of element of what happens when you've got a secret that's going to explode your life if you tell it, but is going to explode the life of everybody you know if you don't. And how does
Wow.
that work? You know, And it's very, very interesting that at a certain point, Matt Murdock has to decide. And really, he does have a choice here. You know, he'd have to give up his law license, but he could go off and be a superhero and he could have that life. And he'd just have to leave behind his previous life and maybe have some legal wrangling to deal with. But
Yeah.
he's done enough good, he'd probably get through it.
Yeah.
In the end, I fear our man is selfish enough and self confident enough. And it's the thing that gets him in trouble in that boardroom that he really
Yeah.
does believe that somehow he can still have it all.
Yeah. He thinks he can have his cake and eat it too. And like, even if the things he's doing are like definitely illegal and definitely against, the ethics that he has agreed to by being a lawyer, he's just willing to do that because that's what he needs to do in order to have that cake and eat it too.
You know, and that's why it's interesting when we get into that case with the white tiger next 2 weeks from now, how really by proxy he tries himself and the other heroes in that case. He's building a case for Daredevil while he's defending somebody else. But even this week, you see him talking to Foggy about, that question of, well, how much danger am I constantly putting everybody around me in by doing this? And do I continue to do this and everything? All of which is fantastic. It's also crazy that it's happening in a mainstream comic book because comic books are supposed to have flying and punching and action. And this has
Yes.
none of it.
No. And
I
yet
mean,
it's
it's
some of the best books
bereft
we've
of it.
read in a long time.
They're fantastic novels, truly
Yeah.
graphic novels. Because what it is, it's character studies, it's human interactions, it's dialogue. And then occasionally there's a brief bout of violence, but even that is very grounded violence. And so, yeah, these are very unusual. And again, he wins the Eisner for Best Writer. The book wins for Best Book. These are going to be so influential in terms of kind of turning the corner in the way superhero comic books can be written, you know?
Yeah.
And
No.
so it's pretty amazing. But
Yeah.
but I do think that, for me, there are a number of scenes in this that when you see them, they just stick with you. And I'm
Yeah.
not actually sure if we're really being honest that these aren't better than the Frank Miller books. The Frank
Yeah.
Miller books are better comic books. They're formative, they're exciting, they've got lots of action, and they're badass. But in terms of just flat out great story, these early Bendis books are hard to
The
beat.
the I would give you at the very least that this might be a better story. Like, just if you're thinking about just the story, I think I'm hard pressed to still give the whole thing, but yes, there is a lot to really like about these books, and would recommend reading these. And frankly, so I remember back when we were talking about Moon Knight and Brian Michael Bendis uh, there, and I remember talking on social media about how I was reading some Brian Michael Bendis in Moon Knight, and there was some people that responded to me, and they were rather critical of Brian Michael Bendis, talking about how he's not that interesting, he's not that great a writer, and I'm like, I'm reading these books, and I'm like, how can you read these books and have that position? Like, there's just a complete disconnect for me. I
So I understand entirely. I can tell you if you'd like what
okay.
my reason is for having much the same thought sometimes. When Brian Michael Bendis started in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was writing maybe 2 or 3 comics a month. And he had enough great ideas and great dialogue every month to make every page the best page you read that month. And then he got
Okay.
popular and he started writing 8 to 10 books a month at a
Oh,
certain point.
Jesus.
And he maybe still had just as many great ideas, but now only maybe one out of every 5 pages is a great page because they're all
It's
spread out
just
over 10 titles.
too much. Yeah.
I think he deluded himself, not diluted, but diluted like liquid by simply doing too much. And I also believe that at a certain point, the problem is that this very dialogue heavy sort of style does get a little old in comic books. People
Sure.
do
They
want
do
their
want their
punching,
action. Yeah, they do want their
right?
action. They do want their punching.
And it also works better in some books than others. Daredevil,
Oh, yeah.
by the time that Bendis took over, was established as a thinking man's kind of book. You know, you've got all of his Catholic guilt, you've got all of these stories that talk about deeper issues and born again and a lot of the journalistic stuff and a lot of the legal ethics. And there's a lot of stuff, that has been gone through in the Daredevil books. And so he fits right in on these. And I think most people who read Daredevil are like, yeah, this is hitting exactly the sort of themes that other people have been touching on and maybe not doing as well for the last however long. If you take that same guy and you put him on Legion of Superheroes, it maybe just doesn't work as well, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and so I think there were a lot of books later on where he either didn't have the time to do the kind of detailed writing and plotting and planning that he's doing on these, or he just got put on books that weren't necessarily where he really belongs. He started out Jinx, Goldfish, all of this sort of noir gangster, sort of darker sort of stuff is right up his alley. It's exactly what he's meant to do. So, yeah.
And it shows. And again, that's why these books got an Eisner this year.
Early Bendis is fantastic. And I think most people who don't like him probably have started with his later stuff and never realized how good he used to be.
Right, Dan, should we jump in and talk about the spotlight for this week?
Yes, indeed. Looking forward to it.
This week's spotlight story.
All right, sir. So we're going to talk about the spotlight. You have chosen issue number 36, 100% Untrue, as your issue to talk about. Going to let us know a little bit about that one. And also, among a series of spectacular issues, I'm interested why this is the one for you. So we'll get to that maybe too.
Yeah. So there's a little lead up to this exact issue that I think we touched on during the year in Daredevil, but I'm going to kind of touch on it again here, which is Matt Murdock's secret has been revealed, and there is an army of media outside his house trying to get a comment from him on the story. Matt and Foggy are in the house discussing strategies on how to deal with the situation, with Foggy suggesting he'll likely be disbarred if he admits that the story is actually true. He also says he should deny it completely, and even thinks he should give up the secret identity because it leads to what he calls a cycle of violence. Murdock ends up leaving town for a couple months to figure out what to do. And as this issue starts, Murdock has returned to New York and has called a press conference outside his house to address the allegations. Quote, this information is 100% untrue, says Murdock, and he says he plans to sue the Globe for libel. This is, of course, met with a ton of questions from the media, but we are quickly taken ahead 3 weeks to Murdock's office, where he gets a visit from the Black Widow. Natasha wants Matt to go put on his costume and go out like they used to go out and throw some heads together, I think was the terminology she used, basically. Uh, Murdock hasn't worn the Daredevil costume in months at this point because he hasn't gone out as Daredevil really since before the press conference. So Murdock refuses yet again, and then after talking with Foggy on her way out the door, we see Widow placing a call saying she's looking for someone. Wasn't sure if we were going to find out who that was exactly, but we did kind of spoil what that who that is she ends up calling and who she's looking for when a little earlier, but it ends up happening again. There is something about this press conference that was absolutely exactly what I expected it to be, yet it still played out unbelievably well on the actual page itself.
I get that.
Just first and foremost, that's where that.
So you did expect him to say, "I'm not Daredevil."
Yes, there was no way to me, given everything that we've been through, I just did not feel like he was going to come clean and actually admit to it, because I think he wants to still be the lawyer in addition to the crime fighter. And so there's really no way he can do that by admitting that it's true. So I was totally expecting it to be false. I wasn't sure how he was going to word it exactly, but I was like, literally the end of the issue, he's like, walking out to address the media, and I'm like, I could not get to the next book fast enough so I could read this book to find out what actually ended up happening.
Because at the very end of the book, he just says, he starts the press conference, but then you don't hear what he's actually saying.
Yeah. He basically steps up to the microphone, and then that's the last panel.
To be continued. Join us next week. So,
I would have gone absolutely just out of my mind if I'd have been reading this in real time back then, because if I'd have had to wait a month plus to find out what actually happened, it would have drove me crazy.
That is the nature of old comic books. Yeah, it's so much different just reading them. You just read as far as you need to get the answers you want. It's so nice.
Yes. Well, what did you think? Did this play out the way you expected it to have played out? Whether it be at the time when you were reading it, or maybe what was it like reflected going back and rereading it again?
So at the time, first off, I did have, I think I bought the first 6 or what was it? I was away for a while, and so I got all of these like at my shop at the same time. I can't remember why, but it took me a while to get there, or I did something. I'm pretty sure that I was not surprised, but I was fascinated by all of this because it just felt so different. Again, I think the thing that a lot of people don't get now is just how weird and revolutionary these stories felt at the time, because you weren't used to this sort of cinematic sort of storytelling, but it was fantastic. And I think I would have somehow expected that he would get out of it without having to actually lie to everybody.
To actually come out and deny it.
Because he didn't just fake having whooping cough and losing his voice for 6 months or whatever while it all died down. He came out and lied before God and the entire world directly to the cameras, right?
Yes.
Bald-faced lied. And that is tough to take. When we get to our was Daredevil a good guy this year, I'm going to have questions for you. So
sure.
I think that for me, the fact that he's got all these people giving him different ideas, standing behind him, questioning him, that sort of stuff. Um, yeah, I don't know. I didn't like that he actually came out and lied. And I also didn't like that then he just decided somehow that he had such a good hand to play that he screwed it up and got himself into a point where now we've got another trial coming up. So
Sure.
he's not the
Yeah.
brightest boy.
No, no, he definitely overplayed the hand, I think.
No, but that's later on, so don't worry
Yes,
about that.
yes. So, Matt, meanwhile, after we see Widow looking for someone, gets an invitation to dinner with Vanessa Fisk. During the dinner, Vanessa gives Murdock the name of the FBI agent who sold his secret to the Globe. We also learn that she's broken up and sold off Fisk Enterprises, but doesn't go into specifics as to where things are at. He actually kind of asks, but she declines to really answer how things got split up into whom and that sort of thing. Matt then offers his
Nope.
condolences on Richard Fisk's death. So he has heard about that. And yeah, so that was kind of an interesting end to that dinner conversation because they just sort of sat in silence for a little bit after that.
Was it your opinion that Daredevil that Murdock knows she killed her son? Is that implied?
That was the impression that was the impression that I got.
That's the impression I get as well, which means also bold move, bringing that sort of thing up. So
yes,
interesting that you killed your son. Yeah, and that at first I'd even wondered if he was like a stepson or something, but as far as I can tell, that is actually her son too. It's not it's as cold as you would imagine it would be that she's doing this. But this is the love of the Kingpin and his wife for each other, is that they basically tear down the world for each other, which I'm not sure is as admirable as they think it is. That you would kill your child because
might not be the healthiest relationship there.
Yeah. No, I don't think they're exactly a role model. But in any case, yeah, that was an interesting scene. And then one of the pages, actually, the whole page, is just the two of them sitting, kind of looking at each other with this weird sort of Renaissance painting kind of thing sitting in the background.
So. Of the Kingpin, right? If I remember right.
Is it of the Kingpin?
Yeah, I think it was like a portrait of the Kingpin in the background. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, it's a that was interesting and again very moody, very very awkward, fantastically written and drawn.
Definitely felt like it was could have been a movie scene, basically.
Yep, 100%.
So as the story ends, Matt returns home from dinner, and outside his brownstone, he senses something. He ends up heading to the roof, and that's where he finds Elektra waiting for him. A conversation that ends up happening in the next issue. But this was just the press conference was just it was one of the most memorable things about this year for me. That's why this stuck out to me as being the spotlight book for this week. I also will tell you, there never in a million years would I've expected the Black Widow to go get in touch with Elektra to have her come and try and talk some sense, quote unquote, into Matt.
What's he say? Something like worst ex-girlfriend ever, which is saying something for me. So.
Yes, so. As that conversation ends up happening in the next book, yeah, he does end up saying that about Black Widow, which is, yeah, he's one to talk.
Yep. Good Lord.
But yeah, so this was to me the spotlight this week. This was one of the most memorable points of the year. It this and like the actual panel that showed the front page story on the Daily Globe of Matt Murdock is Daredevil.
Yep.
You know, it just it had to be there. And like again, this felt like it was 40 years in the making. And so it was just like you just had to see how it was going to play out. And like I said, it ended up playing out how I thought it would play out, but yet it didn't play out like I wanted to see how it played out, regardless of the fact that I've been waiting for it for so long, and it happened kind of the way I expected it to happen.
There you go. Very cool. Yeah, that was, and it is difficult to even say an issue though, because really these are not stories that are meant to be thought of as an issue. It is a storyline.
It is, you know, like I said, the entire year felt like one just it felt like whether you're watching a drama on TV or a full-length feature drama, this is what this was this year. There was no discernible difference in tone, in pacing, in the stories just intermixed and connected so well that they just seamlessly went from one to the next to the next. And you just it like I said, it got me hooked and I just kept going all the way through it really fast.
Yep, I would agree. It was fantastic stuff.
All right, should we talk about some of the rapid fire questions for Daredevil this year?
Sure, let's bring it on. All right, who's Murdock in love with this year?
So
complex.
That is complex. We get both Black Widow and we get Elektra, but I'm going to say it's Elektra. Seemingly because during that conversation with Elektra, he actually suggests, despite his better judgment, that he wishes they were back in time to a time when they were together. And we actually see a flashback scene of the two of them kind of naked in bed together and just sort of chatting a little bit about how they kind of want this moment to last forever, sort of thing.
And we didn't get to that book, but that is within this year, essentially.
Yes,
so, yep.
Yes. That was basically the next issue is during that conversation. And the crazy thing is like Matt is telling himself, don't say these things to Elektra. This is only going to scare her off. And then he goes and says these things to Elektra, and it totally scares her off. She just basically is like, I don't want to hear this, and then leaves.
Yep. Correct answer, though, as usual, is himself. So
probably
as proven by the fact that he put everyone in the position he did.
Time and again, he has proven that to be the case. Yes.
So who's the biggest villain of the year?
Sammy Silk, the underboss of the Kingpin, who seemingly kills the Kingpin, though not exactly, rallies the troops against the Kingpin, but ends up kind of going out rather with quite a whimper at the end, you know, turning himself into the FBI, seeking protection because he's scared of what Vanessa Fisk is going to do, or Daredevil's going to do, or both of them are going to do. And then, you know, then starts the roller coaster that is the Matt Murdock is Daredevil story.
Yep. But he's the one who does in the Kingpin. He's the one that's doing in Daredevil. He's kind of the motivator for all of this. Although in the background, Richard Fisk is actually sort of the guy pulling some of the strings to mess with his dad. He's kind of this little snake in the grass. But
sure.
Yeah. We see Matt practicing law.
We did right at the very beginning, like a panel or two right at the beginning of Underboss before he almost gets blown up. And then seemingly at the end of the year with the trial of the century that you sort of started to talk a little bit about, he's going to be back in the courtroom again. But in between, there was a lot of Daredevil not in the courtroom.
Although so much of the year's plot is driven by his need to kind of keep his lawyer's license as part of the reason
being
he's
a
lying and
lawyer.
everything.
Yeah.
Now, anybody new find out Matt's identity this year?
The whole world now knows.
Yep, or thinks they know. So
Yes.
yep, so that's a little bit of a development. Is Daredevil still a good guy this year? You've got this as questionable too. Excellent. Tell me, sir.
Yes, it is. So is Daredevil a good guy? Questionable. He's intimidates an FBI agent who sold his story, but then was going to give the money to charity, but then gets too smug about the deal and gets the deal called off. I mean, there is a lot of there's a little bit of admirableness about him this year, but there's a lot of him just sort of not being that good a guy, and that's what gets him and keeps him in this mess.
Yeah, it is interesting. He's got a lot of good friends and the like, and a lot of people who still believe in him, but he's definitely causing himself trouble. Daredevil outfit or equipment change?
I was just going to say, to your point, the whole fact that he boldface lied just so that he could try and keep his lawyer license definitely leans me to the questionable to no, he wasn't as good a guy this year as maybe he's been in other years.
It wasn't his best year. Let's put it that way.
It was not.
Did the Daredevil outfit or equipment change at all?
So he didn't actually spend much time as Daredevil this year.
Even in the outfit, yeah.
Yeah, so there really wasn't any equipment or costume changes this year that I saw.
Learn anything new about his past?
So nothing major. We mentioned the flashback to when Matt and Elektra were together once upon a time that he's thinking about as he's talking to her on the roof of his house. Again, I think it was just sort of a snapshot moment that we hadn't seen before, but it wasn't necessarily anything that anything key, I guess.
There you go. Biggest moment of the year for you?
The Daily Globe story about Matt's secret, and then this press conference denial to that story were the big moments this year. What about you? Is that where you're at for this year?
I actually think for the last two, did we learn anything about his past and the biggest moment? For me, I think the biggest actual shock and sort of cool moment was when the like hoods are sitting around their poker game and we find out that they all know who Daredevil is. That actually for me was, not only do we learn something new about his past, which is why the Kingpin hasn't had him shot or whatever, or why somebody else hasn't told somebody else and done it. But then also it was just so interesting as a development to find out that every hood in, New York City seems to know that that Daredevil is Matt Murdock. And they've all been cowed into not doing anything about it because the Kingpin says they can't touch him. I found that fascinating.
That is incredible.
That was actually for me. That was for me the biggest sort of what the heck moment. I think back when I was reading it the first time, and then being reminded about it when I was reading this time. Even bigger than the I am not Daredevil moment at the very end, which was also obviously pretty big.
It just for me it's what does this mean going forward? Again, I just like I don't know how you can be that public about a denial and then obviously your actions then have to back up those words, at least in theory. And so I'm very curious if it means that he's actually going to take a little bit different tact. And to his credit, there hasn't been a lot of Daredevil since he's made that statement. And so it's interesting to see he's doing this because he wants to have both, and it's just a question of how long he can keep this charade up, or how long people's interest is going to keep peaked on this topic before something has to give. And I feel like I just feel like this is a key moment to where the story is going to go, and it's like I'm curious to see where it goes from here.
Yep, that makes sense. I get that. So yeah, it is intriguing. Just that whole idea. Usually at this point, you either need, like a crisis if you're in the DC universe, or Mephisto if you're in the Marvel universe. Are the
Sure.
only ways out of this sort of problem. I guess Doctor Strange can maybe take care of it too if you really need. So
Though that could end up causing a whole other scenario.
raft of other problems come along with that from what we've seen. So
All right, so I think that's our discussion for Daredevil this year. Again, fantastic year. Highly recommend these books. Definitely, they're all on Marvel Unlimited. So if you have a digital subscription to Marvel Unlimited, you could check them out there. Dan, I think it's time to talk about the takeaway for 2002. This week's takeaway. All right, Dan, there was a lot that happened in 2002. We've spent a great deal of time talking about everything that happened on the big screen, the small screen, over at DC, Marvel having a big year, Daredevil having a fantastic year. What's the takeaway for this year?
the interesting thing for me, going back to what we talked about last week, is the fact that big box office does not necessarily translate to big bucks at the comic shop. That what we're seeing with like X-Men being as omnipresent in theaters as it is in the early 2000s, with X-Men 1, X-Men 2 coming out right around this time, that X-Men books sold, at least in relative terms, less than they have at any point in a decade. That there increasingly is going to be this divide between what comic books are in terms of the audience that's reading them in the shops and that's buying the pamphlets on a monthly basis to sort of keep the industry going at the story level, and comic books in terms of what that means for the stories and the movies and the like that are being told to the larger public. And so it's fascinating to me, and I think this is where you start to really see that disconnect, because comics are now going to hit the point where we're actually going to see comic book movies in parentheses, and I'm not talking about Road to Perdition here, right? But like what people will
Right.
start to think of as long underwear type movies as comic book movies almost exclusively are starting to really hit the mainstream. And you're going to get these big Spider-Man movies and X-Men movies, and then that's going to go dovetailing directly into, in 2008, 2010, the big Marvel movies like Iron Man and the Hulk, and I guess Iron Man and Thor coming out, and then leading into those. And so as all of this happens, you see this explosion in interest in the characters. It's going to be interesting to see whether we start seeing that explosion in terms of actual foot traffic and sales at the shops.
Yeah, I would have assumed, I just would have assumed that big box office numbers on these characters would tend to lead to big bucks, big numbers in the comic book store. And at least for this year, that didn't seem like it was as much the case.
And it'll be interesting. I mean, the interesting, or the really crazy thing is that the pandemic is where we really saw sales in comic shops and things like that first crater and then take off, because during the early pandemic, of course, things shut down. But it's just interesting, in this early 2000s period, we're seeing an explosion of interest across the board. Now we get to see how that does translate, and I know it's all good because we're seeing more comic book movies, and the comic book industry is sort of through that just about died in the 90s phase. And I'm happy to say that we don't have a just about die phase for a while now, right? Um, maybe in fact until present, because the collapse of Diamond and the potential for massive tariffs with Canada are probably the most dangerous thing that's happened to the comic book industry since the I don't know, probably the comic book crash of the early 90s. So from now on, it's going to be relatively smooth sailing in terms of things are getting better. But are they getting better really in conjunction, or are they separate paths? You know, are comics just coming back in popularity because they've gotten better and they found their audience again, or are they coming back in popularity because of all the popular media that are attached to them? Maybe it's a little of both. But what we see in 2002 is an interesting data point, at least, that the movies don't make as much of a difference as we'd think they would.
It's fascinating stuff. Like I said, I would have guessed something entirely different than what we ended up seeing this year.
Yep.
It's something we will definitely keep tabs on as we move forward, because there's going to be a lot of data points going forward.
True that.
All right, with that, I think that's going to wrap it up for us for this week. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share this show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast, if you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Maybe you read the Daredevil books of 2002. Share some thoughts. Tell us what you think of Brian Michael Bendis in these books. We'd love to hear from you. You can send us those comments via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com. Or like we talked about last week, we're going to be shutting down the Twitter or X account, going exclusively to Blue Sky. We are at Comics Over Time there. Welcome you to come join us over there. Lots of great creators over there. And I think it's a really good experience. So, Dan, I loved talking about 2002. There was a great many wonderful things to talk about. I'm very curious to see what 2003 looks like, but we don't have to wait that long. We get to talk about it like next week.
Absolutely.
All right. Until next week. Take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.